I was 23 when everything fell apart, like a ripe fruit falling and opening in the sun. And it happened in the only place I believed I was safe, inside the mosque. It was the space I considered sacred, my refuge, the home I was taught to respect and love above all else. I grew up in a Sunni family in northern Nigeria, where the mosque was more than a place of prayer. It was an extension of my own home. Removing my shoes, covering my head, whispering softly, all of this was part of my routine, a silent reverence that carried the weight of generations. Every piece of that carpet held prayers and stories, and in that profound silence, no one noticed the cries that echoed within me. That day, the other girls had already left. Their light footsteps and their slippers sliding on the marble floor disappeared while I stayed to help clean up, as I always did. It was my way of serving Allah, a simple and sincere way of showing devotion. I told myself, a good Muslim daughter doesn't question, a good daughter simply obeys. Then the Imam, with his calm, fatherly voice, asked me to stay a little longer to help him with something. I remember the light from the chandelier reflecting off his glasses, the familiar smile that always brought me comfort. We trusted him. My father bowed before him, and I followed him without hesitation. He led me to the back room, a space usually only accessible to men. For a moment, a doubt crossed my mind, but his smile convinced me to stay. "Don't worry, you're helping the mosque. Allah sees your heart," he said. I had no idea that my sense of security in that sacred place would be forever shattered. The room was cold and stuffy, filled with the smell of dust and old books, a scent I couldn't quite place. The door closed behind me, and the sound of the bolt sliding shut cut through me like a shock. My heart raced. His voice changed. It was no longer gentle, but cold and authoritative. "What are we doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just moved closer. I recoiled, confused and frightened. When his hands touched my scarf, I felt a paralyzing fear. He whispered close to my ear, "Don't resist. This is a test from Allah." In that instant, my body froze. My mind stopped thinking. "It's a test," he repeated. I couldn't scream, couldn't move a muscle. My body, which had always been mine, now felt like it belonged to him, while I believed Allah was watching everything. When it was over, I curled up on the rug that had so often been my place of prayer, smelling of sweat and shame. That same rug where I had knelt countless times now seemed to carry the weight of my suffering. He stood up as if nothing had happened, straightened his clothes, and said with terrifying calm, "Don't tell anyone. This is between us and Allah. If you speak, you will bring shame on your family. Do you want your father to die of shame?" I couldn't answer. My voice was lost in the suffocating silence. I just nodded. I didn't even cry when I left. The tears came later, silently, when I was home, alone. I cried in a way that was unheard, tears that wet my pillow as I rocked, lost in the dark. That night I couldn't pray. The words I'd repeated since I was a child seemed to turn to ash in my mouth. "Ya Allah," I whispered, my heart aching. Why? The next morning I bled. Not just my body, but my soul felt torn apart. The innocence I carried died in that room, and along with it, my faith shattered. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer recognized myself. My eyes were empty, my skin a gray hue, and my hijab, which I had always worn with pride, now felt like a heavy chain around me. I wanted to rip it off, but I didn't have the courage. I kept wearing it because that's what good Muslim girls did. We obeyed. We remained silent. And I remained silent, suffocated, for 3 long days. But silence corrodes from within, and my soul was already beginning to rot. Then one day, in the kitchen, while my mother was chopping onions, I told her. I said it quickly, as if ripping off a bandage in one fell swoop. "I am Farouk." He touched me. She stopped. The knife froze in midair, but she didn't react as I expected. She wasn't shocked, nor gasped, nor showed any fear. She just blinked slowly, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What did you say?" she asked. I repeated more slowly. This time, the slap came, hard, straight to my face. "You idiot," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Don't ever say such things again. That man is a servant of Allah." I stood there, cheeks burning, stomach clenching, waiting for her to look into my eyes and see the truth, that I was her daughter, that I was suffering, but she didn't. "You must have done something," she said, almost as if I were to blame. "You must have tried." It was at that moment that I realized a cruel truth. She didn't see me as a victim, but as a burden, a shame, as a curse. I crawled to my room like a ghost. My father arrived late that night, probably already knowing what had happened, but he didn't say anything. The next day, he took my phone. That afternoon, he locked me in my room, and that night, I heard him praying loudly in the living room, crying silently, with his hands covering his face. Ya Allah, remove this disgrace from my house. I hadn't hurt anyone, but somehow I was the disgrace. And deep down, that insidious guilt consumed me. What if I had done something wrong? What if this was a test from Allah? What if I failed? I curled up and cried again. Only this time, I didn't ask any questions. I stopped talking to him because I wasn't sure if he was still listening. I didn't leave my room for 2 days. I didn't eat properly. I didn't pray. I couldn't breathe properly. I stayed there, huddled, as if I were dying in the dark. They brought food, knocked on the door, but no one came in, and I didn't say a word. After all, what do you say when your mother thinks you seduced her, and that your father would rather bury you than hear the truth? I wasn't just broken. I was blacked out. On the 3rd day, my father unlocked the door without even looking at me. He said coldly, "You will not bring shame to this house. Do you hear me?" I nodded, unable to respond. He continued, "And don't tell anyone. No one will believe you. Do you think you're the first girl to cry wolf?" My mouth opened, wanting to protest, but my throat closed, and the words died before they could come out. I wanted to say, "I'm your daughter. Trust me." But he walked away before I could form the words. That night, I heard my parents talking in whispers. My mother would say, "She's acting strange," and my father would reply, "Maybe it was a dream, or Shaitan trying to confuse her. She needs discipline and prayer." The next morning, they took me to the community shika, an elderly woman who counseled the girls. They told her I was rebellious, that I was hearing things. I sat on the prayer mat, my scarf tightly wrapped around my face, barely breathing. The shika stared at me, as if I were a wild animal. "You know this is a direct test from the Mala," she said. "You must remain silent, dear. If you are innocent, Allah will reward you." I wanted to scream, "Reward him for what? For being assaulted in his house?" But I said nothing. In our culture, silence is the way to survive. I left that room with tears in my eyes. Outside, I saw a group of girls entering the mosque, laughing carefree. One of them looked like me a year ago, naive, obedient, full of faith. I wanted to grab her hand and say, "Don't go in there. You don't know what happens when the doors close." But I kept quiet. That night, my mother sat beside me and tried to act normal. She offered me a cup of tea and said softly, "This life is full of trials. Even the prophets' wives were tested." I looked at her. "Mommy, I didn't pass a test. I was destroyed." Her jaw tightened. "You won't say that. Allah sees everything. He knows what's best." I slowly placed the glass on the table. Then I saw her hand tremble. For a moment, I thought she would believe me, but then she shook her head. "Maybe you misread his intentions. Maybe you misunderstood." I stood up. "No, I didn't misunderstand. He raped me. Mom, in the mosque, on the prayer mat." She slapped me again. Tears streamed down my face, and this time I didn't hide them. I wanted her to see, to feel what she was doing, but she turned and said coldly, "Never repeat that lie. You will bring death to this house." I fled to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The same sunken eyes, the gray skin, but now there was a crack. Something inside me had snapped. The faith I'd cherished so dearly began to slip through my fingers like sand. If Allah were real, why was he silent? If he were just, why did he protect the Imam and not me? If Islam were true, why did its leaders deny what I suffered? That night, I clutched my hijab like a chain, desperate to find some comfort, some meaning in it all. I opened the holy book at random and read, "Your wives are your fields. Enter their fields whenever you wish." Surah Al-Baqarah 2:23. I held my breath, feeling those words like acid on the wounds I'd tried to hide. "Come in whenever you want," I repeated silently, the meaning ravaging my soul. This was the verse I had memorized as a child. I always recited it with pride, as if it were a promise. But now, those words felt like cruel permission, almost like a weapon against me. I dropped the book hard, backing away as if it were fire. Perhaps it had already burned me. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. My mind whirled with one question. What else was hidden in that book? What else had I been taught to accept in God's name? When the sun rose, I didn't say my prayers for the first time since I was little. I skipped Fajr, not out of laziness, but because I no longer knew who I was speaking to. I sat on my bed, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to remember the last time I felt peace. Not the kind of peace that's fake, nor the kind you show off to others. A real peace, deep in my soul. But I couldn't remember. There was only fear. Fear of sin, fear of hell, fear of men, fear of God. But there was no love, no comfort, no security. What if God was just fear? What if I was worshiping a prison? That night, my younger brother knocked on my bedroom door. He didn't come in. He just slipped a note under the door. It read, "People are talking. If you tell anyone, I'll deny you're my sister." I held the paper with trembling hands. He was only 15, but he already knew how to protect the family name better than anyone. Later, I left the house just to breathe. The sky was dark, the stars faint, almost extinguished. I whispered to the wind, "If you're there, show me, because I'm drowning." I didn't know who I was talking to anymore. Allah, the God of the Christians, didn't answer. All I knew was that the God I'd been taught didn't feel like a father. He felt like a judge who let men like the Imam walk free. I looked up and whispered again, almost without strength, "I can't take it anymore." For the first time, I thought about disappearing, vanishing, erasing myself from the world. But there was something inside me, a small, almost imperceptible flame, a spark that refused to die. It was a faint but clear voice saying, "Keep going. Don't stop here. Don't give up." And I didn't give up. I didn't yet know who was speaking, but that voice wasn't mine. It was the beginning of something new, a voice that wasn't burdened with shame, a voice that would one day call me by name. For now, I clung to the silence and waited. I waited for anything that might save me from the wreckage of my faith and the ruins of my soul. If this was a test, I was already failing it. And yet somehow, I was alive, still breathing. I began hearing things at night, not voices, not exactly. They were memories, noisy memories that came back without asking permission. The sound of the bolt closing, his voice commanding me to obey. The sound of the carpet scraping under my knees. My breath was shallow and shaky as he whispered, "This is a test from Allah." I closed my eyes and relived it, over and over, like a nightmare I'd never wake from. Only it wasn't a nightmare, it had happened. I carried it in my bones. Some nights, I'd wake in a cold sweat, my fists clenched, my throat scratchy from crying in my sleep. Other nights, I simply couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes and return to that room, to the mosque, to the floor, to the place where everything in me had been shattered. My mother thought I was possessed. She brought holy water and recited verses to try to save me. My father told me to stop embarrassing the family and act normal. But I couldn't pretend, not when even the sound of the current made me shiver. I tried, I really did. One night, I sat down to read the Mosque, seeking comfort. I opened it to Surah An-Nisa, hoping something would make sense, that something would calm me. Instead, I found this: men are responsible for women by right, according to what Allah has given each one above the other. And as for wives whose arrogance you fear, advise them, then abandon them in bed. And finally, beat them. Surah An-Nisa 4:34. I read it over and over. My heart raced. Beat them. They told me it was about order, about responsibility. But to me, after everything I'd been through, that sounded like permission for violence. I wanted to throw the book across the room, but I couldn't. I just stared at that sacred book I'd loved since I was a child, that I'd kissed after reciting. That taught my father that he could beat my mother if she disobeyed. That book that called me a field, a possession, a trial. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a scream, it was a soft tear, like fabric slowly unraveling, but I felt it. A part of my faith, the faith that sustained me, simply fell apart. I got up, went to the bathroom, washed my face, looked at the girl in the mirror, and, for the first time, asked out loud, "What if Islam is not the truth?" The question sounded like thunder inside my chest, not because I didn't want answers, but because I knew how dangerous that doubt was. In my community, doubt was betrayal. Asking about apostasy was tantamount to denying one's life, but I couldn't lie anymore, not even to myself. So I started searching, late at night, when everyone was asleep. I got lost on the internet. I typed things I never thought I'd search for. Why do mothers abuse women? Women's rights and Islam versus Christianity. Can I leave Islam? I clicked on forums, blogs, videos, anything that didn't look like advertising. It was like walking into a sandstorm. So many voices, opinions, anger. I found a mix of stories online, some marked by bitterness, others by fear, many by abandoning faith. But amidst it all, I began to see patterns that reflected my own pain. Women who had been hurt by men who were supposed to protect them. Girls who were repeatedly told, "Be silent. Allah is watching you." The more I read, the less isolated I felt. The shame that had suffocated me began to dissipate, but along with it came an identity crisis. If everything I had invested my life in was crumbling, what would I be now? Who was I without Islam? without the hijab I had always worn, without the prayers that dictated my days, and the rules that, though rigid, gave some meaning to my existence. It was a frightening void. I remember one night when, somewhat by accident, I found a YouTube video called "Muslim Girl Meets Jesus After Trauma." I hesitated to click, feeling a weight of guilt, as if I were betraying everything I knew. But my finger clicked. She looked like me, dark skin, her scarf tightly tied, her eyes moist. She told how she was abused by someone in the mosque, how she cried out to Allah and nothing changed. Then, one night, she had a dream about a man dressed in white who said, "You are mine now." She spoke the name Jesus, and something inside me stirred. It wasn't faith or doubt or hope. It was just a spark, like a light breeze entering a dark room. I turned off the video before it ended, my hands shaking, not for fear of her, but for what the story awakened in me. Because deep down, beneath years of teaching, there was a question I had never dared ask. What if Jesus is more than a prophet? I had never explored that idea. I was always told that Christians were wrong, that the Bible was corrupt, that Jesus didn't die on the cross, that he wasn't God. But why? Why did just his name make me feel different? That night, I whispered softly, "Isa." Strange, almost foreign, but also comforting. I wrapped myself in the blankets and cried, not from pain, but from exhaustion, from confusion, from not knowing what to believe. I was on the brink of something I didn't yet understand, about to fall. And when I did, it wouldn't be into emptiness. It would be into arms I'd never known, but had always longed for. It all started with a comment, a simple comment. I went back to the same video, the one about the girl who encountered Jesus in a dream, and this time I watched it all the way through. Then I scrolled down to the comments section. There were hundreds, some calling her a liar, others citing verses to condemn her, and some acknowledging her courage. One comment stopped me in my tracks. It said, "If you're reading this and feel trapped, Jesus is watching you. I was once a Muslim too. Send me a message, you're not alone." The profile was simple, a flower for a photo, the name Grain Darkness. I hesitated, my heart racing, my hands sweaty, but I clicked. It wasn't a fake account. It was a real person. I went to her profile and saw a blog and a contact form. I thought I'd just browse, that's all. But I didn't just browse. I wrote. I sent a short, no-nonsense message. Just, "Hi, I don't know who you are, but I think I'm where you were. Please don't judge me. I'm scared." I hovered over the send button for 5 long minutes, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of doubts and fears. When I finally clicked, an immediate panic gripped me. What if I'd made a mistake? What if this person wasn't who they said they were? What if this was a trap set by someone in my community? But 2 days later, the reply arrived, soft as a sigh. "Sister, I will never judge you. I've been there too. Jesus saved me. Tell me your story whenever you want." She signed herself as Leela, a simple, common name, but at that moment it felt like the door I needed to open. I responded carefully, saying that I hadn't told her everything, that I hadn't talked about the me, ma'am, that part of me that was lost, that was broken. I only said that I was raised with great devotion, but that something happened that left me without faith, unable to see God in the same way anymore. Leela didn't respond with tears, nor with verses or biblical references. She simply asked me, "Have you ever felt rejected by the God you were taught to serve?" The word rejected hit me like a slap. Yes, I felt that way. I had always been taught that Allah was merciful but distant. He loved obedience, not me. He loved my submission, not the scars I bore. Leela replied, "The true God, the one who created you, loved you even before your first prayer. He saw what they did to you and wept with you. Jesus doesn't demand your purity. He offers you his." I had to read that 3 times. He offers you his. I wasn't sure what that meant, but it touched me deeply. Soon after, Leela sent me a link to a video called "The Woman at the Well," a story from the Bible. I watched it quietly, afraid my mother would hear. It was about a woman who carried shame, who had been rejected by her own people, a Samaritan, not even of her own religion. But Jesus sat beside her, knew her pain, her past, her loneliness, and offered her living water. I wept. I couldn't quite explain it, but for the first time I saw God not as a distant judge, but as someone who kneels beside the broken. Something changed in me after that. Leela started sending me a Bible verse a day. I confessed that I still didn't know what to think of Christianity, and she said something that stuck with me. "I'm not here to convert you. I'm here for you to experience the love that exists on your path." That phrase stuck with me, because after what I'd experienced, I thought no one saw me. Not the mosque, not my parents, not Allah, but this stranger on the internet did. And the more she talked about Jesus, the more I felt like someone was slowly knocking on the door of my soul. I started asking questions. Why do Christians say Jesus is God? She explained that it wasn't just because he preached love, but because he became a love. He walked the earth as a man, with us. I asked, somewhat in disbelief, but isn't it absurd to think that God became a man? And she replied, only if you think God is too holy to approach. And if he is holy by come closer? That shook me. I had never heard God described like that. He was close, so close, no anger, no threats, no hellfire, just reaching out to me in the midst of my wreckage. I haven't told Leela everything, not yet. I haven't told her about the mosque or what happened behind that locked door, but she never pressured me. She just said, when you're ready. Jesus is in no rush. One day I asked her why she had abandoned Islam and believed in Jesus. She sent me a voice message and spoke with a calmness that broke something inside me. Because when I met Jesus, I stopped trying to deserve love. He gave me love before I even changed. I cried listening to that, because I'd spent my entire life trying to be enough, praying, covering my head, obeying, submitting, and none of it protected me. But Jesus, the man who sat with sinners, touched lepers, and saved women from stoning, seemed like the God I'd always hoped for. Leela asked if she could pray for me. I didn't know what that meant. I'd never heard a prayer not in Arabic, but I accepted. She sent me a recording, and the words I heard healed wounds I hadn't even known were open. Father, she doesn't even know your name yet, but you know hers. Show her you're safe. Let her feel you. Let her know you never left. In the dark room, in the mosque, in the silence, you never left. I prayed that prayer every night for a week, not because I fully believed it, but because I felt less alone. As if maybe there was a God who wasn't disgusted by me, who didn't call me filthy for being touched, who still wanted me. And slowly, something began to shift. It wasn't a shock, nor a miracle, just a subtle movement, like a flower raising its head after a long drought. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but deep inside, I began to wonder, is Jesus really God? Does he love me? Even after the mosque? I'd never said his name like that, out loud, without fear, without hiding behind prayers or warnings. But that night, I whispered, my lips trembling, alone. Jesus. No frills, no defenses. I sat on the bedroom floor with the lights off and the curtains drawn. My heart pounded, and all around me, my mother banged dishes in the kitchen, my younger brother yelled at the TV, but there in that hidden corner, it was just me and him, Jesus. That name was never welcome in our home. It was the name of others, of infidels, of those who didn't fast properly, of those who worshipped a man, and that's what we were always taught. But for me, that name became a refuge. It carried a strange, inexplicable peace. With each verse Leela sent me, something pulled me deeper. It wasn't just curiosity now. It was hunger. A hunger I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. I had questions. So many questions. I asked Leela why Christians believe Jesus died, and she answered with a calmness that touched something deep inside me. Because love is not afraid of suffering. He died to carry what you couldn't, your shame, your guilt, your past. I tried to understand, then asked, but why would God need to die? Isn't he all-powerful? She said, yes, he is. But his power isn't shown by running away from pain, but by facing it for us. He didn't avoid his shame. He embraced it. That word, shame, hit me hard. I'd tried for years to wash away that filth with prayers, silence, rules, but it remained stuck, invisible, like mud. Even obeying everything, I felt dirty. But whenever I heard about Jesus, it was like water. Not water I had to pour over myself, but water that fell upon me, cleansing me. Leela sent me the Gospel of John in Arabic, and I began reading. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Confused, I continued to verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I froze. God had come here, among us. I whispered those words, feeling the weight of them in my mouth. It felt wrong, even dangerous, but it also felt right. That night, I didn't have a vivid dream, but something soft. I was in the mosque, but the room wasn't dark, and I wasn't alone. Someone was sitting in a corner, dressed in white. I didn't see their face, only felt their presence. They didn't speak, but when they looked at me, I felt naked, not ashamed, but fully seen. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear, only liberation, as if someone had finally seen me whole, without running away. When I woke up, my pillow was wet with tears. I didn't tell anyone. Of course not. Here, talking about it was dangerous. People paid dearly for less. Jesus wasn't someone you talked to at home, only discussed. but I couldn't get him out of my head. I asked Leela, "What if I believe in him but I'm still afraid?" She said, "Then he'll hold your hand, even when you're afraid." Faith isn't the absence of fear. It's trusting someone more than you trust yourself. It hit me like a wave because fear was all I knew. Fear of hell, of shame, of being seen. But when I imagined Jesus, I didn't feel fear. I felt warmth, not the warmth of fire, but the warmth that envelops the soul. I wanted to understand more, so I began searching in secret. I downloaded a Bible app and hid it in a folder called School. I read Psalms, then Luke. Every night after everyone was asleep, I whispered his name, not with complete faith, but with curiosity, longing, and fear. One night, my mother walked in while I was watching a sermon Leela was preaching. I panicked and closed the door quickly, but my heart raced for hours. That's when I understood. Why was I hiding something that made me feel alive? Why was I afraid of the only name that made me feel clean? That night, I texted Leela, saying something I'd never said before. I think I believe in him. I didn't understand everything, but I felt deep in my heart that Jesus was real. He wasn't just a prophet, he was God. Though I couldn't explain how, my heart knew it. Leela didn't respond with euphoria. She simply wrote, "He was waiting for you. You were always his." At that moment, I broke down. I cried into my pillow because I knew deep down it was true. So many years trying to be good enough for a God who seemed distant. But this Jesus didn't wait for me to reach him. He came down to me in the midst of my pain, my trauma, my confusion, and called me his. I whispered his name that night, without fear this time, Jesus. And I said something I never thought I would. Looking up at the ceiling as if it were heaven, I whispered, "If you are who you say you are, I am yours." It wasn't a prayer full of pretty words, but it was my surrender, my moment of truth. I didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, I felt peace. And that peace had a name, Jesus. I thought I could keep it to myself, a secret between me and God. I prayed silently, whispering his name when no one was watching. But faith, true faith, doesn't stay hidden for long. It begins to show in our eyes, our voice, our choices, and in a house like mine, that was dangerous. It started when I stopped waking up for the Fajr prayer. My mother noticed, but didn't say anything at first, just eyed me suspiciously as she passed the bread around the table. Then the questions began. "Are you okay? Are you sick? Why are you so quiet?" I didn't answer much, blaming school, saying I was tired, but a mother can sense when something isn't right. One afternoon, I had just finished reading Lucas on my phone when I heard footsteps. My mother came in without knocking. I jumped and hid the phone under my pillow. She looked at me seriously and asked what I was doing. "Nothing, just texting." She grabbed the pillow, grabbed the phone, and unlocked it with her thumb before I could stop her. And there it was, the Bible app, the messages with Leela, the sermon video. She didn't scream, didn't say anything. She stood still, as if swallowing something painful. Then came a hard slap that made my head shake and my cheek sting. "You filthy girl!" she screamed. "Is this what you've become? Watching Christian trash?" I tried to speak, but the words just wouldn't come. She pulled my scarf so hard it knocked me to the floor. My brother ran into the room, confused and scared, demanding to know what was happening. My mother pointed at me like I was crazy, saying I'd been brainwashed, that I'd become a kafir, an infidel. My brother grabbed my phone, scrolled through the messages, and his face darkened. He asked me point blank, "Do you believe in Jesus now?" I couldn't lie. I could only respond with a timid nod, but that gesture shook the entire house. He roared with rage and kicked me hard in the side. "You've shamed us! Are you going to bring a curse on this house?" I cowered, trying to protect myself, as harsh words fell like blows. I spent the night on the floor outside my room because they'd locked the door so I couldn't get in. The next day, my uncle arrived, the same one who had sent me to I Am years earlier. He didn't ask any questions or show any surprise. He stood beside me where I was sitting and simply said, "You're worse than a whore." He spat on me, his hot saliva burning my cheek. My mother stood behind him, silent. My father didn't even know. He was away on business. They decided to sort everything out before he returned. That same night, they dragged me to the mosque. The smell, the dark hallway, it all felt like a nightmare all over again. I nearly fainted with panic. They shoved me into the Imam's office and locked the door. I trembled, feeling my heart race as he slowly looked up from his desk. His beard was longer, his glasses thicker, but his eyes remained empty and cold. He stood, walked around the desk, and looked at me as if I were trash. "Now you follow the accursed one," he said contemptuously. "Now you believe he is God." I didn't answer. He stepped closer, speaking angrily. "You dishonor your family. You dishonor your father. You belong to no one now. No Muslim will touch you. You are filthy." I whispered, my voice trembling. "I belong to Jesus." His face contorted, as if I had spat on him. A hard slap came, then another with the back of his hand. He shouted verses, called me a blasphemer, a shameful creature, and grabbed me by the hair, throwing me to the ground. I thought he was going to attack me again, but no. He stood over me, muttering curses. "You should be dead. I would bury you myself in front of this mosque." When they opened the door and took me out, I could barely walk. But for the first time, the fear that had consumed me had vanished. Not even when they erased my phone, my messages, and forbade me from talking about Jesus, did I care. The worst had already happened. I was still alive. I was still breathing. And I was still his. In the weeks that followed, I remained silent. They forced me to participate in prayers, to fast, to memorize, and to obey. But I wasn't truly present. My body was there, but my heart was with him, elsewhere. In secret, I whispered verses from the New Testament under my breath, hidden from the world. While washing dishes, I pretended to recite surahs to avoid suspicion, and I humiliated myself by wearing my hijab, trying to hide what was happening inside. But in my mind, I already imagined myself clothed in God's righteousness, no longer pretending to be Muslim, but simply surviving. One night, as I hung out the laundry outside, I looked up at the starry sky and whispered a silent question. "Jesus, do you still see me?" A light breeze blew through the yard, so gentle and unexpected that I shiver even now. Deep in my spirit, I felt a clear answer. Yes, he still saw me, still called me his, still loved me. Even there, in that difficult place, the fear of hell no longer consumed me. I had been through it all, and despite the scars, my faith remained alive. The next day, I borrowed a neighbor's phone while she was doing laundry and wrote a long message to Leela, telling her everything. She didn't respond right away, but that night I received a voicemail that shook me. It was a prayer, and I could hear the tears in her voice. She called me a sister, a brave woman, a daughter of God. And in that moment, I cried so much, because even in my loneliness, I realized I wasn't alone. There was no church in our neighborhood, only mosques and a heavy silence, filled with fear and whispers that disappeared when the doors opened. But one Sunday morning, pretending I was going to the market, I followed the path Leela had shown me. It began in an alley behind a bakery. I passed through 2 iron gates, stepped through puddles of oil, and knocked 3 times on a rusty steel door that seemed to lead nowhere. Suddenly, a small hatch opened, a pair of eyes stared at me, and then closed. For a moment, I thought I was in the wrong place. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like the whole alley could hear it. Then the door creaked open, and a woman in her 40s quickly pulled me inside. She locked the door behind us without a word. The place was simple. The air smelled of damp concrete and candle wax. There were no luxuries, just an old couch, a few plastic chairs, and a wooden cross hanging on a cracked wall. But to me, it felt like the heavens had opened. A few people were already sitting in a circle. An elderly man, a woman with a baby, 2 teenagers. Leela was in the back, saw me, and began to cry. We didn't hug or make a fuss. We just exchanged looks that said, "You did it." A man approached carrying a Bible with a worn cover. He smiled at me, not the fake smile of the men at the mosque, but a pure, free, sincere smile. "Welcome, sister," he said. "You are home now." And there, in that moment, I broke. I fell to my knees, because for the first time, someone had called me sister with sincerity. We worshipped in silence. No instruments, no microphone, just our voices, hands raised and tears flowing freely. Pastor Daniel told the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how they refused to bow down to the golden statue and were thrown into the furnace, but they weren't alone. There was a 4th man with them. I knew that fire well, because I had lived it. And in that moment, I understood who the 4th man was, Jesus. Not just the God from the pages of the Bible, but the God who was with me in that fire, with girls like me, in the midst of suffering. After the service, we shared a simple meal, rice cooked and stewed in a large pot, but the moment tasted like true communion. I sat next to Leela, holding her hand under the table. She whispered that we would return the following week, but I shook my head, feeling like I needed more. She frowned in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I want to be baptized." Her eyes widened with excitement. When I told the pastor this, he didn't hesitate. He nodded slowly and said, "Then let's not wait. We couldn't do this in public. It's too risky." So we set the date for the next morning, Monday at sunrise, by the river, just outside the city limits. I could barely sleep that night. imagining the moment of sinking and emerging, reborn. At 5 a.m., I slipped out of the house quietly, while my family was still asleep. I tied a scarf around my head, carried a change of clothes, and a nylon bag. Leela met me near the market road, and we walked in silence, nervousness tightening our throats. When we reached the river, Pastor Daniel was already there, along with others. They didn't ask me to tell my story or repeat a prayer. They just looked into my eyes and saw everything. I stepped into the river, feeling the cold water splash against my skin and soak my long skirt. The pastor placed a firm hand on my back and the other gently on my forehead. He looked me in the eye and whispered, "You have never been forgotten, never rejected. Jesus has waited for this moment." Then calmly, he dipped me underwater for a moment. The world disappeared. There were no masks, no screams, no shame, just water, light, and silence. When I emerged, soaked and shivering, a relieved, happy laugh escaped my mouth. The others clapped softly, and Leela hugged me. We cried together, sobbing, while some whispered the word Christian. I didn't need labels. I knew exactly who I was now. Hers, Jesus's. But I also knew it came at a price. There was no way back. Ever. That same night, something changed at home. My father returned early from his business trip. I hadn't expected him until Friday, but he walked through the gate just before sunset. He was tired and confused. I ran to greet him, as usual, but he didn't smile. He stared at me, silent, for what seemed like an eternity. Later, he called me into the living room. My mother was already there, arms crossed, with a look that seemed to pierce my soul. My brother leaned against the wall, my uncle nearby too. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with silence and tension. My father cleared his throat, breaking the moment, and my mother spoke, direct and cold. "You became a Christian." I froze, my eyes fixed on her. She didn't even move, even seemed proud. My voice cracked, but I managed to say, "I believe in Jesus." My father's eyes welled up, but he quickly slammed his fist on the table, breaking the silence. "You dare bring shame to my house?" I stood there, unbowed, unexplaining. I just whispered, "Jesus saved me." My uncle stood up, furious, accusing me of blasphemy, but my father said nothing, just walked to the window, staring out into the night. When he turned, he said something I never imagined I'd hear. "You are no longer my daughter." Suddenly, I found myself cut down, torn from my name, my place, my blood. They threw my clothes into a nylon bag and pushed me out the gate. It was almost midnight. The street was dark. The distant sound of dogs barking seemed to fill the void. I was barefoot, trembling, but inside me, there was a strange peace, as if I had waited my whole life to lose everything and gain what truly mattered. I walked to Leela's house, trembling but free. I knocked lightly on the gate, and when she opened it, she said nothing. She just hugged me, like a sister, like I was a lifeline. It was in that embrace that I understood. I didn't need their shelter, nor their approval. I had Jesus, and I had a new family, formed not by blood, but by faith. The next day, I sat in Leela's room, the lights off, the windows closed, every knock on the door making my heart race. Her mother came in and sat beside me silent, but she handed me a small purse containing 5,000 naira, a handkerchief, and a folded note. She simply said, "Tonight, don't wait." I hugged her, but she didn't hug back. She got up and left. Later, Leela walked me halfway, the two of us silent. She pointed to a small blue house hidden behind an abandoned welding shop. "Promise me you'll be safe," she whispered, squeezing my hand. I nodded, then turned and walked into the darkness of the night. The house belonged to an elderly woman named Mama Rejoice, who for years had welcomed people like me, former Muslims, fugitives, broken souls. She had no husband or children, but a steady voice, strong arms, and an enormous faith that filled the place. That first night, she handed me a bowl of Gary soup and said, "You've seen fire." And I knew that there, finally, I was beginning to be reborn. But girl, there's more to come. That's what Mama Rejoice said, and I had no idea what she meant. I only understood on the third day when I went out to buy bread and some sachets of water. The heat was intense, the streets were almost empty, and as I was almost to the store, I saw two men leaning against a wall. Their faces seemed strangely familiar. One of them slowly stood up, blocking my way, while the other came around and stood behind me. "You think we don't know," the one in front said, his voice monotone, but his eyes blazing. My legs went numb. I tried to back away, but the man behind me grabbed my scarf tightly. "Judas," he spat. "You deserve death." I screamed, but no one came to help me. They dragged me into a dark alley behind the pharmacy. One of them punched me so hard in the stomach that I gasped and collapsed to the ground, my ears ringing and the taste of blood filling my mouth. Then he drew a small, cold blade and pressed it to my neck. "Say the Shahada," he ordered. "Come back now." I tried to speak, but my voice faltered, tears welling in my eyes. Not from fear of death, but because I didn't want to deny Jesus. Not after all he'd done for me. My lips trembled, and all I could manage was a whisper. "Jesus!" The blade tightened its grip. "Say, Jesus!" Just then, a bottle flew out of nowhere and shattered against the wall. The men turned in alarm, while a woman screamed from a nearby house and a boy yelled, "Thieves!" In the chaos, they fled. I don't quite remember how I walked back, only that I collapsed at Mama Rejoice's door, shaking like a leaf. She pulled me inside, locked the door, and in a calm voice said, "Your family sent them." I nodded. Needing no further proof, I already knew. My father, my uncle, had sent those men to scare me, or perhaps for something worse. Still, I didn't hate them. What I hated was the darkness that dominated them. The lie they believed, and that I once believed too. That God wanted fear. That God needed blood. That he was distant, cold, unreachable. But I had known Jesus, had seen his eyes in a vision. I felt his arms carrying me across the mosque floor. He didn't demand blood. He gave his own. He didn't break women, but he healed them. That night, I decided I would never hide again. If they wanted to kill me, let them kill me singing, standing, with a Bible in hand, in the name of the one who gave me life. Strangely, I felt peace, more alive than ever. The following Sunday, I returned to church in hiding. When Pastor Daniel saw the bruises on my face, his eyes filled with tears, but he didn't ask what had happened. He simply opened the Bible and read 2 verses from Corinthians. "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, struck down, but not destroyed." That verse became my anchor. I memorized it, repeating it every night before bed. It became my sword and shield. A week later, during worship, Pastor Daniel asked me if I wanted to share my testimony. At first, I declined, but as I sat there, listening to the voices around me, I heard a whisper within my heart. It wasn't with difficult words, nor with fear in my heart, but with true love that I heard the voice in my chest. "Tell me what I did for you." I stood up, my hands trembling and my body heavy, but with the certainty of someone who had experienced death and returned to tell the story. I talked about everything. The mosque I pretended to belong to, the Imam who once looked at me with disapproval, the sleepless nights, the bloodshed for the pain I carried, and the nightmares that haunted me. I shared the vision of that man dressed in white, the voice that called my name and assured me I was not alone. I told how Jesus never abandoned me, even in my darkest days. When I finished, silence filled the room, and it was Pastor Daniel who broke the moment, touching my shoulder tenderly. "This is how grace manifests itself." I couldn't hold back the tears. That same night, 3 people came to me to say they too wanted to follow Christ. Among them were a former Quran teacher, a widow with a weary look, and a young man who observed me every week, silent but present. God was moving hearts even within my fragility, even amid my scars. He was writing a story that transcended fear, shame, and even the barriers of religion. But the threats continued. One week, someone broke into the church and spray-painted "Death to Infidels" on the walls. We cleaned everything up. We worshipped more intensely, lit more candles, offered more prayers, and cultivated more courage. Mama Rejoice once told me, "If hell is shaking, heaven is roaring." I believed her wholeheartedly. I was no longer just a woman on the run. I was a witness, a daughter of the Most High, a warrior who would never bow to fear. Then, on a night I will never forget, I had a dream so vivid that I woke up crying. I was in a dark desert, the sky a black blanket, but the ground glowed with red flames like embers. My feet were bare, feeling the burning hot sand. People around me wept, screaming for water in desperation. I recognized faces, my uncle, my former Quran teacher, and even myself, all bound in invisible chains, with empty eyes and mouths that moved silently. Then a voice like thunder echoed, not with anger, but with the force of an inescapable truth. "You saw me, and they did not believe." I looked up, and there he was, walking on fire, unburned, his white robe shining not like flames, but like peace, a serene river in the midst of war. He came to me, held out his hand, and said, "Do not fear, for I am with you." It touched my eyes, and in that instant, flashes of memories came. My father crying, holding a knife, my mother sitting, tearing her own handkerchief, my younger brother kneeling, reading the Bible, and me, in the middle of a crowd, speaking with power, no longer with fear. Then the dream faded. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. It was 3:12 a.m. when Mom knocked softly on the door with a calm smile. She said she'd felt the Lord telling her to pray for me. When I told her about the dream, she smiled and said, "That wasn't just a dream, daughter. It was a calling." I still didn't understand everything, but deep down, I knew something had changed forever. I was no longer just a girl with a story to tell. Now, I was someone God wanted to use, someone He was sending to something greater. But how? I was still hiding, still recovering from my wounds, still afraid. The following Sunday, something unexpected happened. A woman I had never seen before stood up during the testimony. She looked to be in her 50s, dressed simply, like the street vendors on our street, and her head was tied with a scarf. She pointed at me and began to tell of a dream she had had. She was preaching to women in hijabs, and they were crying, many taking off their veils and raising their hands. Silence filled the church. I didn't know her. She didn't know me, but God was speaking. After the service, she came closer and said softly, "Your mouth will set many people free." I couldn't hold back the tears. I got home and cried on the floor, talking to God. "If it's really you, I'm willing, but I'm still broken. I'm still afraid." Then He spoke to me, in a whisper so soft I almost didn't hear it. "You were never chosen because you were strong. You were chosen because you were willing." That night, for the first time, I wrote my full testimony. I put it all down on paper. The abuse, the shame, the mosque, the pain. But I also wrote about the vision, the freedom, the joy, the peace. I didn't plan on sharing it with anyone. It was just for me, a way to heal. But Mama Rejoice read it without asking and printed 5 copies. The following week, a woman from church brought a copy to her sister, who was still Muslim. 2 days later, the sister came to our house, her eyes filled with tears. "I want to know the Jesus who rescued you," she said, and surrendered her life to Christ right there on our plastic mat. I hugged her, because she truly became my sister. After that, the floodgates opened. Within a month, 7 women showed up. Some were divorced, some were fleeing forced marriages, some were still students. But all of them were broken, just as I had been. They were all searching for something true. I didn't see myself as a leader. I still had nightmares, and I woke up shaking some nights. But the more I shared, the more I felt healing coming through. Jesus wasn't just saving those women. He was also saving me. One of those nights while we were praying, I had a different, calmer dream. I was in a room full of children crying softly, clutching their bellies. A tall, dark-eyed man entered and said, "Feed my lambs." I looked at him and replied, "But I have nothing." He then placed a loaf of bread in my hands, and the room lit up. The children stopped crying and began to smile. When I woke up, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I started a small group of 6 girls. At first, we called it the House of Light, and we met in the back room of the church. We shared meals, read the Bible, prayed, cried, and laughed. Some were still Muslim in name only, but their hearts were already seeking Jesus. I didn't force anyone. I just told my story, and He did the rest. At one such meeting, a tall girl named Amina raised her hand and said, "I saw a man in white in my dream." He looked at me and said, "I've waited so long for you." Was that him? That man I'd seen in the dream? I smiled and said yes, that he was waiting for all of us. There, in that simple, dusty room, Amina decided to give her life to Jesus. We cried, we sang, we danced barefoot on the cement floor. And in that moment, I thought, perhaps the true church isn't made of grand cathedrals or powerful microphones, but of broken people who find each other and find hope together. But danger still loomed. We needed to remain discreet. No posters, videos, or names exposed online. If the wrong person found out, everything could be over in a blink of an eye. Still, we trusted in God, who was silently building something strong, even in secret. Sometimes I remembered the girl I was, that broken girl lying on the mosque floor, thinking it was all over for her. And there I was now, tending to my young lambs, a healer with her own wounds, not because I was strong, but because Jesus was enough. I had no intention of returning to the mosque. Just thinking about that place made my body shiver with fear. So many memories, so much pain, so many unanswered questions. But Jesus kept whispering one word: forgive. At first I resisted. How can I forgive? He destroyed me, stole everything from me. But the Holy Spirit wouldn't give in, gently repeating, forgive. I tried to push it away, telling myself I had already forgiven, but my heart knew I hadn't. Every time I thought of that, a part of me still wished he would suffer, that he would feel what I felt. One night, while reading the Bible, I came across a verse that fell on me like a stone. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, Pray for those who mistreat you. I slammed the book shut. The teaching seemed too heavy. The next day, when I opened the Bible again, this time I stared at the verse without looking away. I fell to my knees and for the first time, prayed for myself, not for punishment or exposure, but for God to save me. The words came slowly, amid tears, anger, and surrender. God, I don't know how to do this, but I surrender to you. I forgive you. Accept the pain, accept the memories, accept this weight. And something inside me snapped. An invisible chain that had held me back snapped. For the first time in years, I felt a relief, a lightness I hadn't even known I needed. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was a weapon, an explosive of healing. 2 weeks later, I received news I never imagined. The Imam had been removed from the mosque. Rumors were circulating, more girls were approaching. I should have felt victorious, but deep down I felt sad. Sin destroys everyone, even those who practice it. I learned he was very ill, hospitalized and alone. His wife, also lost, childless, and those rebellious boys who had once followed him were now ashamed. And once again, I heard Jesus' voice, "Go." I hesitated, there in the small kitchen of our home, saying, "No." But he repeated, firmly and clearly, "Go and do it." It didn't make sense to me. Why would I go visit the man who had hurt me the most in my life? But something inside me wouldn't let me rest. So I said to Mom, "Rejoice." She prayed with me, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "If Jesus is sending you, he'll go into that room with you." So I went. My hands were shaking and freezing the whole way. I almost told the motorcyclist to turn around, but when we arrived at the hospital, I entered room 206, a private ward. I stood at the door for 5 minutes, fighting fear before finally turning the handle. When the door opened, there he was, thin, pale, a shadow of the man I remembered. He looked up and his face changed. First shock, then guilt, and then a heavy silence. "I don't want anything from you," he said. I simply replied, "I just came to tell you I forgive you." He looked away, and the tears began to flow. I remember him saying, "I see your face in my dreams." Every night I trembled there, but I was strong, not in myself, but in Jesus. "I don't carry you anymore." I said calmly, "Jesus carried you, and he can carry your weight too, if you let him." At that moment, he collapsed on the bed, crying like a child. I didn't touch him, but I prayed right there, "Jesus, do to him what you did to me." After that, I don't know what happened. I never went back there. But I left that room free, completely free. The past no longer possessed me. The mosque no longer defined me. My scars no longer controlled me. I became a new woman, whole, redeemed, forgiven, and capable of forgiving. Now I share my story wherever I go, in schools, in homes, in small churches, and even in hidden back rooms. Not because I'm strong, but because Jesus lives within me. Some nights I still wake up sweating, but then I remember the man in white, the fire that didn't burn me, the river that found me. I remember the girl I was and the woman I've become. My name is not shame. I'm not a victim. My name is loved, chosen, free. And if Jesus could enter a dark mosque and rescue a girl no one believed in, he can rescue anyone, anywhere, even when all seems lost.